Well, good morning and welcome to the June 10th edition of Issues That Matter. And we have a important show today, and we have two fabulous guests talking about a critical issue that we're embroiled in as we speak, and it's only going to get worse over time, and that has to do with affordable housing. And my guest today is Jessica Maurer. She's the executive director, and let me get this right now,
Tough one.
of the Maine Association of Area Agencies on Aging. And my second guest is Martin Groman, who is a state representative from Biddeford, I believe.
Yep.
Is there a district number?
House District 12, yeah, essentially
District 12.
Downtown Biddeford out to Ray's Market and Westbrook Skating Rink. Yep.
Great. Well, welcome.
Where we are.
Thank you so much
Happy
for
to
having
have
us.
Thank you, Bob.
Welcome.
Pleasure to be on.
Excuse me?
Pleasure to be on. Thank you.
Well, you haven't said, I want you to say that after the show.
It's early yet. I get it.
Pleasure to be invited.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Fair enough.
Jessica, what's going on in the world of Maine relative to affordable housing?
Well, a lot is going on in the world relative to affordable housing. So I'll handle the human part and pass it over to my colleague on the legislative side. But right now we are in an unprecedented time in Maine's history and in the history of the nation and even in the world. And I always say this is good news and bad news, and it's the same, which is that we're living longer than ever before. And because of that, the systems that we've always relied on aren't really working for our older adults anymore. And so it used to be you bought your house when you were 30 or 35, you planned on living in it for 35 or 40 years. Most of that time you were a wage earner, and you retired, maybe you moved away, maybe you moved in with your kids, maybe you went into assisted living, but you weren't thinking about living in it for another 30 years. Which is what's happening now, is that folks are, getting done work at some point in their life 30 years ago, and now they've lived in a house for 30 years on a very low income. So about 30% of Maine seniors live on Social Security alone, with an average Social Security of under $14,000 a year. And if you think about living in a house, right, that is old, not weatherized, has old systems, at some point during that time, from when you retire until you die, and you have this limited income, something's going to go wrong in your house, right? Your roof is going to leak, or your furnace is going to go, or your septic is going to go. I mean, we're talking big things, not little things, but big things, right?
Over the past couple of years, I've experienced all of that.
All of those things. Me too. I have an old house. This is sort of normal. And then on top of that, right, you add on top of that normal infirmity, right? It doesn't matter in what great shape you're in, no matter how it is that you age, at some point, you stop being able to do the things that you've always been able to do. So maybe you can't paint your house or clean your gutters or fix the things you used to always fix. So it makes a lot of sense, right? You're living longer than ever before in houses with not a lot of income, and your ability to fix them is sort of going down.
And the beds available in assisted living communities and nursing homes and so forth.
Well,
We don't have enough of those beds.
Well, not even in that. When we're talking about affordable senior housing.
It's staying in the home.
Well, no, when we're talking about affordable senior housing, we are talking about moving somewhere else, but not with any assistance. So it's not different than assisted living. That's where you actually need some help. But this is so the area agencies on aging are the first place people call when they need some access to services. And we are getting inundated, I mean hundreds of calls a week, by older adults who are in crisis. So they call us, they say, my spouse died, something went wrong with my house, or I have had a health problem and I can't live in my house anymore. So they call us, they say, I need to find a place to live. And they don't need assisted living. They don't need nursing home care. They just need a new apartment. And they want, where they want to live? They want to live in the same town that they live in. So they can't live in their house anymore. They want to live in their town. If they can't live in their town, they want to live in their general vicinity, because that's their network of friends.
With their world.
Right. And so you know what we tell them? Well, that's great, but there isn't any affordable senior housing in Maine, and your wait's going to be between 3 to 5 years. And when you get an 89-year-old person for the first time in their life calling somebody and asking for help, and they get that message, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. We just had a focus group in Lewiston, Auburn, where an old man, when he was asked about his housing situation, he said, "Oh, I live in assisted living." He said, "I assist my wife, and she assists me, and we're going to live there as long as we can, but it's going to be 4 years till we get to where we need to go." And that's the story we're hearing constantly, because there's about a 9,000 person gap right now between affordable senior housing and the demand for it. So people are waiting much longer and now are having to stay in these unsafe houses or in unsafe situations.
Is there ongoing discussion about how we are going to address this?
Yeah, I mean, so we passed in the latest legislature a bond issue that went to the voters in November 2015, and it passed by a 2-to-1 margin. It would have at least been a beginning on the problem, start the ball rolling to catch up with that 9,000 unit shortfall that we have. Right now, that bond, unfortunately, is held up in some political differences. But I think it's an issue that we just really need to get after. I mean, when I talk to voters in this district, it's really one of the first things that they mention. So I'm really focused on it. And it comes out in a couple of different ways. You see, it could be that you really can't mow the lawn anymore. Could be that your home is not energy efficient. A variety of things push you towards wanting to live in a community of elder individuals with sort of a suitable housing arrangement. So as Jess said, it's not assisted living per se, but it's something that works really well for people.
An observation that I make is that it is riddled with competing priorities. I live in Kennebunk. Yeah. And well, I know Kennebunk is thought to be a wealthy community, and I'm sure, I know it has those pockets of significant wealth. It also has those pockets of less than significant wealth. And the school system, I mean, they just passed a thing in Kennebunk to a massive improvement in the school system, structure, buildings, and so forth. And my concern is how many people are going to be made homeless because they cannot afford the taxes on their home. And that's one of the competing priorities that we have.
That's right.
And as we were talking before the show started about we're entering a new world.
Right.
Well, that's right. We are entering a new world, not necessarily willingly.
Right.
It's just the world as it has developed.
Well, the cool thing, though, about what you just said and about where we are, and we were talking just before we started about the fact that this situation creates a multitude of opportunities for us, and it just doesn't create them. Communities are already taking advantage of them. And communities in Maine have been very forward-looking about what their demographics are, how people are moving in and out of their communities, and what they know is that older folks, if they don't have some place to go or some solutions, if they don't have access to home repair, or they can't easily subdivide through accessory apartments. In-law apartments is what we call, right? So if they can't easily create an in-law apartment for a caregiver or some other thing, that they're going to leave. If there's no housing that matches what that older adult needs, the older adult's going to leave the community. And many towns in Maine, many, hundreds, are figuring this out and are thinking differently about housing. And they're trying to figure this out. So it's why this bond was so perfect and not enough. It was not enough money, not nearly enough money. But it was perfect because it helped towns think differently about how they could locate and build affordable senior housing in their communities to keep people where they are. There's this great little unit up in Fort Fairfield, 28 units that the town developed themselves. And when I asked the town manager, why'd you do that? He said, because everybody was leaving.
Yeah,
Everybody was leaving.
You want people to stay in. I'll just build on that for a second if I can. So on Monday night, I toured the Dorothy Stevens Project in Kennebunk, and I was talking to some of the residents there, and they're from all over the state. I happened to talk to one fellow from Old Town. So it is an unfortunate effect. I mean, that's why, among the very top projects that would be funded once we get these bonds released is here in Biddeford. It's in our mills. So I think it's really an ideal situation. If we can have people who want to get out of their homes because of property taxes or just don't want to mow a lawn anymore, really, ideally, we can keep them here in town. These are people that, they're our relatives, and we want them to be close to home and not be forced to head, to Fort Fairfield. It's a wonderful community, but really keeping people close to home is ideal.
Right.
I can see where it is. It very definitely is a challenge for the community, just on a zoning basis. One of the things that I've fairly recently learned about is these pods that you put
Oh, yeah.
in your
Yes.
backyard
Right.
for the parents who've lived in this house for many years. Now the children that now own the house, they can have a parent house, you might say, a parent home, a little pod in the back, in a very small house. But I am quite certain that that's going to raise zoning issues
Yes.
in
That's right.
towns,
Right.
which is another obstacle that people are going to be facing.
That's right. And I will say that when you ask the question about how are we going to solve this issue, there isn't one answer. There's not a silver bullet. Certainly the bond is critically important. We have to build more affordable senior housing, and we have to build it all over Maine, but we have to be smart about it. We have to build it in town centers, in regional hubs, so that people can stay locally. But we have to do this thing. We have to change our thinking around zoning, because again, we're in an unprecedented moment in time. We used to want our communities to be, right, exactly the way they were. We want Damerscott, Maine to look like Damerscott, Maine, and we don't want any change to it. But the reality is, if we're going to help people live there, we're going to have to think differently. And the towns, so I just did an aging in place seminar for town managers in March. 113 managers came to talk about this stuff. They are really thinking, and they're the ones saying, well, we've got to change our zoning law. So I think we're at that tipping point where and I'm not saying every little zoning board in every town in Maine is going to be hip to what their town managers want to do, but at least they're thinking, we have to do this differently. We have to allow for that kind of thing.
That's the first step in bringing about change.
That's right.
Is the thought process.
Right?
And the second step is sitting down and having good, open discussion and accepting the views of other people, not necessarily agreeing with them and not necessarily falling in line with them, but at least hearing them out and factoring that into your thought process.
Right.
And I want to say now that anything that this show can do to advance that effort, be it locally here in Biddeford or on a statewide basis, I want this show to do exactly that, because I'm very active with the MS Society, and I suspect that we have a significant numbers of people in our community that are faced with many of the same issues.
Sure. I think. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, keeping up with painting or home repair or something like that. I mean, I want to build on something you said, Jess. Is that these communities, these projects are generally, they're very appealing. I mean, and as they should be. They can be built efficiently from an energy efficiency and a cost efficiency point of view. It's a good way to build housing, and we do want it, though, to be appealing. If you think about where any of us would want to live, a lot of these projects are in walkable urban downtown areas, and I think it's really wonderful to see projects that are, where we have grandparents living next to the elementary school or things like that. And a lot of times that's the kind of result that we get with these projects, and it kind of keeps our families together and close to home. And that's what I think is ideal.
Have you been down to the Young Street project in South Berwick?
Yes, that's wonderful.
That's ideal. It's probably one of the best things I've ever seen. And they literally, and it took them years to get the zoning, get through everything, but they plunked this great, very beautiful affordable senior housing unit sort of right in the middle of what was a parking lot with a school, library, walking to every shop and, multiple restaurants, pharmacy. Basically, these folks who are going to live there, and I think they're already full, if not.
They filled right up,
They
yep.
filled right up. But you can walk to everything you need right there, and that's what we're really, and the nice part is Maine Housing has been great about working. They're thinking about the future of housing in Maine. Maine Housing has been very thoughtful and a good partner. And they're actually starting to say, how do we weave this into where we spend our money? So we want to work with a community like Bedford that's going to be locating housing in a way that doesn't warehouse seniors. And,
Right.
and 30 years ago, that's how we developed affordable senior housing. It was where was the cheapest land in town, while that was 5 miles out of town. But what happens is that people are aging in place, as we say, and 30 years later, they're all still living there, but they don't have cars and they have no way to get to town. And so they're much more isolated. We want to build communities that are good for all ages, and that's, we talked about this before too, right? I mean, we need workers in Maine. We need to actually attract people to move to Maine to make sure that our economy can grow. And you know what millennials want?
Walkable
I
urban
suspect you're
downtown.
going to tell us.
They want the exact same thing as boomers want.
Yeah,
And there's tons of national data out there about that boomers and millennials want the same thing, are going to be competing for the same thing. They want to live downtown in walkability. They want access to arts and food and music, entertainment. They want public transportation because, kids coming out of college who get married have double debt. They can't actually afford a house and 2 cars.
Now
So
that- you just touched on something that's been a concern of mine ever since I started my work with the National Able Network. Is that the transportation,
Right.
the parceled transportation system that we have? You can't, if you're unemployed in Kennebunk and there's a job that you're perfectly fit for in Saco, there's no easy way to get from Kennebunk to Saco
Right.
if you don't have your own transportation.
Right.
And
That's a whole nother show, Bob.
but yeah, I know it is. It's probably more than one show, but it is an issue that needs to be addressed.
Right. And these age-friendly community initiatives that I've been talking about are really looking at all of those things. They're looking at home repair, home maintenance, transportation, and I was just this week at the Department of Transportation at their Public Transit Advisory Council, and we are talking about how do we take these great little volunteer efforts that are, coming up everywhere, grow them, actually maybe get some resources into them, and then connect them to hubs and build more regional transportation. I think we're looking at it, but again, I think it's important. I always say, there's nobody to blame here, right? If the real gist is that we're living longer than ever before, that's good, right? So we weren't really planning on that, and so we didn't plan on it. Now we're playing catch up. But we have to catch up. We have to invest in the infrastructure that's going to support people aging in the way they want to age.
Unless we lost all of our humanity
Right.
and did nothing to extend people's lives, it's going to happen. People are living longer. They're outliving their ability to support themselves, and it just, the level of importance, I think, can be indicated by how difficult it is to affect effectual change. It is a thought of mine that the more difficult something is to achieve, the more important it is to achieve it.
But I want to come at it a different way too, if I could. I mean, I'm not that far from getting my AARP membership card myself, but I do think there's opportunity here as well. I mean, if you think about our sort of 50-plus community as far as an employment point of view, there are people that are typically wonderful assets to any company. I mean, I wonder sometimes if we get a little tied up in saying, Maine is the oldest state in the nation or whatever it is, and you tend to think of that negatively, but I'm not really sure it is negative. We've got some concerns to address, but I also think it's a wonderful opportunity for us too.
Right.
And it's not necessarily tied into my age, which I'm no longer a youngster, although sometimes I behave like one. And I used to work with people who were older, and I would say, do not categorize yourself as being older. Categorize yourself as being more experienced.
Right.
You have,
Right.
If you're 65 years old, you have 65 years of life's experiences
Right.
and facing the challenges
Exactly.
of life's
That's right.
experiences.
That's what I'm
That's
trying
right.
to say. Yeah.
And that speaks volumes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's no question about that. As a matter of fact, when I talk about this stuff, I say, when I talk about the idea that we need affordable senior housing to keep people in our communities, I'm like, what are you, insane? We just invested 65 years in this person, and there's a big return on investment still to be had, whether that person is a full-time worker, a part-time worker, is the head of our town council, or is a volunteer in any multitude of things that we need volunteers for. That person is fully developed and is wise and is got skills that they can offer. Why would we let them walk away? Why would we not keep them in our community? So this is a return on investment thing, right? We've invested a lot of money in this 65 or 75-year-old person, and we should understand that there is still significant value that older folks into their until they're dying. Even then, they have significant value. But I'm saying there's a lot of worth there that we just sort of don't think about. We say, well, they just let them go. Let them move to North Carolina with their son. I'm not going to change the way I have my town. And we got to think differently about that.
And if they move to North Carolina, it's only a matter of time. And I would venture to say it's not going to be a long time before they're going to be faced with exactly the same challenges, if they're not already facing them. But they're not really recognized as yet.
Right, but I've had people tell me they can't find housing. They've looked. I mean, literally. So this is a Damerscotta Aging in Place event. This woman in her late 60s stood up and said, "I was a teacher for 30 years in the school just up the road. I own my house. I tried to get the town to let me subdivide the house because I can't afford it anymore. I can't afford the taxes," which you were talking about, "and I can't take care of that much house. So I tried to get them, let me do two units. They said no, so I have to move. I've looked from Bangor all the way down to York for a housing situation that I can live in." She said, "I can't find one. They're all full and I have to wait too long. I have to sell my house. I can't afford it. And I'm leaving. I'm going to go live in North Carolina with my son. I'm going to build a little house right next to his." She said, "I just want you to know that I'm really heartbroken. I don't want to go. This is my community. This is where I want to live." And that's what we're hearing everywhere across the state is that.
What do you see, I'll say legislatively, that would be the next logical step to take?
I think, unfortunately, we are looking at a situation where we'll have to pass legislation that essentially requires the governor to release these bonds. So, if you recall, about a year ago, we were working on a similar issue with the Land for Maine's Future bonds, and these are bonds that promote conservation and sensible downtown development too. That gets left out. There's actually a project right here in Biddeford that's key to the Riverwalk that ultimately got funded, a parcel right next to Mechanics Park. So we needed that done. And I think what happened, Bob, is that we just created enough awareness around how critical this issue was. I think the governor looked at it, and I talked to him about this, and said, this is not money well spent. People don't care about getting outside and conservation and saving lands for our children and stuff like that. And I think enough of us got together and said, actually we do. We really want to work on this issue. And so that I put together an amendment that passed the House 145 to nothing. As a freshman legislator, it was a proud moment for me, and I had the mistaken impression that everything I proposed would pass 145 to nothing from there on out.
Oh, yes.
Of course, far from the truth. But anyway, so that was a situation. We just got enough people around the state, enough communities to reach out to their legislator and to the governor and say, look, this is important. We really need you to do this. And I think it's the same kind of situations. You mentioned what can I do on the show. I think we want to keep beating the drum on this. There's not a legislative way, unfortunately, until we reconvene in January to actually enact legislation. But that comes up pretty quick, and you know, ideally we'd sort of hit the ground running in January with a lot of legislative support. We are the ones that make the laws, and push through and say, listen, you got to release these bonds. They're you know, it just represents good policy. It's the right thing for the state.
And from, you know, an advocacy point of view, I can't help but say we're in an election year, and we certainly intend to do everything that we can do, and I'm talking broadly aging advocates, to get older adults when their candidate knocks on their door sometime between now and November to say, not just what do you think about affordable senior housing, but will you do something? Will you do something that requires the governor to issue those bonds? I don't understand why, and well, I guess I do understand why. So the older, you know, the older generation that we have here, we've always heard of the greatest generation, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
they're also called the silent generation, and that's because they grew up at a time when children should be seen and not heard, and they lived through the Depression. When they just did without. And so there is this sense of always, first of all, I don't want to put somebody else out. So if you're going to spend money, spend it on my kids. There's this, and then there's the I'm not going to make waves. I'm just going to live with it. And so we have all these folks who are living in houses. We hear dreadful stories. I'm not going to tell them, but dreadful stories about how people are living, and they don't say anything. So I say, why aren't we mad? Why aren't older adults mad and saying, no, wait a minute, the legislature, bipartisan, agreed, totally agreed, we need this money. And voters approve it. Here it sits, we have this incredible demand that's growing. Governor, please issue the bonds. We need to be saying this.
You link the conditions that they are faced with today with conditions that might have existed during WW2,
right?
the Great Depression. And they may be a part of them that says it's not as bad as it was back then.
Exactly right, right. But you said from a humanistic point of view.
That's right.
Really, as a moral, as our moral compass dictates, are we okay with people? And I'm telling you, the number of people who are living in homes with only one bathroom on the second floor, who can't access it, who are crawling up and down the stairs on their hands and knees once a week to take a shower.
And they can't afford one of those electric.
Oh no, but they can't afford to put
elevated chairs.
Right.
they can't afford to put a bathroom in downstairs, and there's no place for them to go. And so this is not. It's not a humane thing to be doing. Is to continue to ask people to live in housing that doesn't work for them.
And like Land for Maine's Future, it's not a partisan issue.
Right.
Bonds take a 2/3 majority to get through the legislature, and neither party holds that majority. So we
Explain what a supermajority is.
so we have 151 state representatives. So we need 101 essentially to vote for this, which means for any bond issue. And that means, and the House is really quite evenly, almost exactly evenly split. So this bond issue passed the House with a very significant majority, and actually has Republican and Democratic co-sponsors from both sides. And there are good reasons for that. It's something that we really need, and it includes funding for weatherization, and and if there's anything that's, I would say, mildly controversial about it, it's that it does have specific requirements for some rural projects in it. Now, I grew up in rural Western Maine. I grew up in a little town called Carthage between Dixfield and Weld. And you know, that certainly appealed to me. I think people here in Biddeford in the same kind of way understand that. You know, we have a thriving downtown, but actually a fairly rural community part of town too. So, point being, I don't want this to come off where one party's trying to advance over the other. It's really just something that is smart policy.
No, doesn't strike me as a political issue. I'm sure politics will weigh in at some point, but if everything goes the way arguably it should go, from a humanitarian perspective,
Right.
politics should not factor into it.
No.
But no doubt, in the world we live in today, which
Right.
is not necessarily the world that we would design, but politics will weigh in on it. And all I can do is simply say that I serve a community with my involvement with the MS Society. I serve a community that is facing many of the same challenges that an elderly community would face.
Absolutely.
And to serve that community, I would be more than happy to make whatever impact we can make on this show, which is no doubt minuscule
Right.
because we serve a very small community.
But
Well,
an
I shouldn't say
important
very
one.
small
Yeah,
community.
yeah.
Biddeford's a
Absolutely.
good-sized town.
Yeah.
Or a good-sized city, I should say.
Yeah.
But in the whole scheme of things, it's small.
Right.
We have some abilities that we may not be able to take full advantage of. Like we do have access to YouTube. I do
Right.
have shows on YouTube that can be parceled out, and you'll be each given a DVD
Oh, great.
of the show.
Great.
And what you do with that DVD, I only make one request.
You don't play frisbee?
The studio makes one request, and I make one request. The studio requests that nobody change the credits. That they will show up as being the show is being produced on Biddeford Public Access.
Wouldn't know how to do that
My
if I tried.
request,
Right.
my personal request is tell people not to use it as a coaster.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So I was just going to say, though, I think to your point, actually, and you're, sort of serving the community that you serve, which can often lead to disability. Older adults, about a third of older adults have some sort of disability. And I think the great thing about these housing units, the affordable senior housing units, are not just that they're efficient and located in a place where you can get to access to things. They are also accessible, and even the ones that are 2 stories will have oftentimes an elevator. They're going to have no thresholds. They're going to be modifiable like this. If they're not built for folks who are in a wheelchair, they're modifiable within 24 hours to have the counters dropped. So this is a true aging in place.
I see what's transpiring, what we're talking about today, is being very, very similar to what we went through when we had legislation that we tried to get through the previous session, and we got it through unanimously in the House and Senate, but the governor vetoed it, and we were not able to rally enough support to override the veto. That was then. Now, in April, we went through the same process, except this time we got unanimous support to override the veto.
Right.
So we got the bill. And I look at what you folks are doing now,
Right.
and I say, well, maybe they could take a page out of our book.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
we hope.
The page out of our book was that whether it was due to something that we did special, or whether it was just circumstances that gave us the ability to put together a very good team of organizations, all focused on the same issue, which was to pass LD, the LD bill that gave tax credits to people with disabilities, not just MS, any disability, and they did not have to be officially disabled. They just needed to be able to demonstrate that they needed to make the modification on the home.
That's right.
Put in a wheelchair ramp and so forth. Yeah, excellent piece of legislation. I voted for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
And we have a terrific coalition. I don't know if you want to talk about
whether he wants to talk about it or not, I'm going to put him on the spot.
Oh well, it's
Talk about the coalition.
Yeah, it's been great for me actually to really get engaged with this issue and get to know people like you, Jess, and Amy Gallant at AARP Maine and so forth. It is something that I am spending a lot of time with. And one of the things that I think is really interesting here is, for example, one of the groups that we're working with is the Maine Real Estate Development Association, which is probably not an acronym that most people are familiar with every day, but I would say is a fairly conservative organization of larger developers, but this is something that's pulled together a really diverse group of stakeholders that are interested in working on this issue.
Association of General Contractors as
Right.
well, the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition. So it's been, and the Maine Council on Aging, which represents 65 organizations. So it's been, and many others, by the way, but that's just sort of the big names that we've really got: construction, real estate development, older adults, all affordable housing, advocates, all together on how this thing needs to go. And I will tell you, I will say, we asked for 65 million, and we thought that was the bare minimum. That would have built 1,000 units of affordable senior housing, 65 million, when we have a 9,000 person need. Drop in the bucket with 1,000. We only got 15 million. Still can't get that issued. So I'm going to say, we're probably going to go back to the well and say nothing has changed. As a matter of fact, what's changed is we have a worse crisis now than we did 2 years ago, and we still need more money. And whether the governor issues them or not, I want those bonds ready to go for the next governor, or as soon as the legislature acts to say that they have to be issued.
And just to be clear, we are building some of these projects now, right?
That's right,
Using
that's
general
right.
fund dollars. But what the problem is so significant that we have to sort of jump ahead a little bit, and that's the point of bonding. In June is when the state typically issues bonds. We just did issue 111 million in bonds last week, and they went out. We got a just over 1% interest rate, just to give you an idea of how efficiently we can do that.
Right.
So this is just a really excellent time
It's the
to
best.
hit the market with state bonds. It's a sensible and fiscally responsible time and approach. 1%, can you believe
That's
that?
right. I love that. No, I can't believe that. I mean, you
it's a-
can't really do better than that,
No,
can you?
you just can't.
No,
So-
you really can't.
And it's, so we have a certain capacity within our general fund. I mean, there might be, certainly we're not going easy on Governor LePage in this discussion, but I think there are things that he's doing well, and we're being fiscally responsible, and I really strongly support that as a business person. We're making, if you look at our budget like I do, at a minimum of every month, if not more frequently, it's really working pretty well. And we have a capacity to build some of these units, and but we just don't have a capacity within our budget to build the needed number. So that's the reason for doing it via bonding.
That's right. Right, and Maine Housing will be issuing a few very small number of projects. We'll be authorizing and funding a few projects, which is great. And they're being very forward thinking about where they're going to locate those. But it's not. It is the same amount that they've been developing every year, which is allowing this number to grow and grow and grow. We, as you say, we have got to get ahead of it.
The factor that was mentioned earlier, I think is a all-consuming factor, and that is that as people get older and the population is getting older, the housing stock is getting older, the competing priorities are becoming more and more significant, more and more dramatic,
Right,
and much more difficult to overcome.
right.
And it's very difficult to figure out where is
Right.
which is more important.
Right. Right. Well, I will say though, this is all tied to our economy, I agree with you about looking at opportunities, but I also will be happy to go to the gloom and doom scenario, and I'll tell you, I talk to real estate agents. So again, if you can't move out of your house, that doesn't work for you, right? You can't keep up. Then your house is going to literally fall down around you, and that's happening all over Maine. And you don't have to get far to see that. To see one of the big things, older adults, once they can, become unable to do certain things, they're not able to take their trash out to the dump. And so you get I'm saying I'm not I'm
No, I
So you get-
I more than hear you.
Yeah.
I almost live it.
Yeah. So here we are, right? And real estate agents, when I talk to them, they know that there are older adults who are literally hanging on in a house with holes in the floor, holes in the roof, furnaces that don't work, blah, 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 blah. And then they go, right? They move to North Carolina, or they do go into assisted or nursing home care. And the house isn't saleable, and this is a big problem for communities. They can't actually get insurance to sell that. I mean, somebody's going to have to fix that house, or it's going to have to be bulldozed. And because it's down every dirt road in rural Maine, we don't see it sort of collectively, but it's starting to have an impact, right? So if we want people to move here, young folks, once they want to start a family, are still happy to live in suburbia. So they want to be downtown when they first come, and they're young, and but then they want to raise their families out here. We have to have good housing stock for them, So this is like all tied in together.
You're saying it's good if the sort of housing stock kind of turns over naturally.
Right.
Yeah,
but
that
the
makes
housing
sense
stock's
to me.
good.
Yeah.
Not in complete disrepair.
Not run
Yeah.
into the ground. Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
So.
Yeah, it's sort of a sensible
You know,
passing the torch.
Right. Yeah.
We talked about, and I believe Marty mentioned, taking the trash out. Well, in Kennebunk, they've come up with this idea of these big, good-sized bins that you have to wheel out to the road. And if you happen to have a long driveway, that's a haul. If the driveway happens to be rocky, that makes it more difficult. If you're in a blizzard condition, it makes it darn near impossible. How does an older person get that bin out to the road?
Right.
And what does it do to the community when you have all these bins lined up on the road? It's I don't know what the alternative would be. There really is no good alternative in that regard.
I think you do reach a point where keeping up with the house, either from a maintenance point of view, often, frankly, an energy cost point of view, if the home hasn't been weatherized, with the windows leak and stuff like that, it can be a problem.
And as part of this bond issue, that was weatherization and so
Yes.
forth
Right.
was included in that.
$500,000 went to not just weatherization, but also home repair.
Yep.
And so that money in particular would leverage some federal funds that are available to do
Well,
that sort of work.
The clock is pushing us a little bit here. What I would suggest, I am not a fan of one and done. I am not somebody, I'm not a fan of covering an issue and then letting the issue just drop. No. I would very much enjoy having you folks on again to discuss the progress made,
Sure.
the challenges in front of us, and we can talk about we can set up a time frame and so forth. But I want to stay involved in this issue
Great.
because God only knows if I may not be involved in this issue involuntarily. If the MS happens to take a wrong turn. And I consider myself very fortunate and I tell people, do not use me as the face of MS, because the way it's impacting me is nothing compared to the way it's impacting a
absolutely.
lot of other people.
Absolutely.
And that also gives me the responsibility of doing whatever I can to help them face less of a burden.
Yeah, you've got great perspective.
Yeah.
And I want to share that, not only whether it's MS or Parkinson's or whatever,
Right.
or just old age,
Dementia.
dementia.
Oh, boy.
I'm
Whole nother.
I vaguely recall something about that. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be great, Bob. I mean, it's a pleasure to be on. Jess, I don't think you know this yet because we just pulled some plans together right before the show, but we're going to convene this group every other Monday is the thinking to just update each other and keep pushing the issue forward. So we should have good things to report on and
All right.
progress that's
Well, let's
being-
keep in touch.
being made.
Great.
And if there's one takeaway, one point that you would want people to take away from the show today, Jess, what would that point be?
I think that we need advocacy still. That older adults need to start speaking out about what they want for their future here in Maine, how they want to live here in Maine, and they need to start being more vocal with every venue, whether that's with their town around zoning and accessory apartments, or it's at the state level or even the national level. That we want things to catch up with what the reality is, and so I think the takeaway for me is that I really think older adults could benefit moving all of these issues forward by finding their voice.
Yep.
For me, I would say, our 50-plus community is a wonderful asset, not a liability as we tend to speak about it. I'm really not comfortable with that. And I want to come at it another way and say, I think every Maine city and town should work to be a home and a host for all of the 50-plus community that either lives there now or may move in with one of these projects or whatever can be done via zoning or whatever it is. I think that's really the way that I'm coming at it and why I think this is so critical.
Yeah,
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both.
Thank you very much.
You did a
you,
good
Bob.
job of making your points, and I was happy. I'm glad I had you. Happy to have had you, and I look forward to a follow-up show. And folks, last time I checked, which was not all that long ago, it was a beautiful day out there. You live in a beautiful community, not far from the ocean. This is part of God's country. Take advantage of it, but be safe and simplify your lives. Have a great day. See you next week. Bye-bye.